Hello and welcome back to my Astro Imaging Journey channel. Today I want to discuss the importance of hard drive read and write speeds as it pertains to our processing rather, and how we can determine which of our drives will suit us best for the task at hand. So if you've watched most of my videos, you've heard me refer to my network attached storage, or my NAS server, where I keep most of my data, and you also see me working off of local hard drives as well. And it's one of those things that space can be at a premium depending on where you're looking. And we got to balance the need for speed versus the need for space. So with that, let's get to the task at hand here. So the first thing I want to go over is how big are the files that we are working with. So since I'm using a DSLR, let's go over here to the raw images. So here we have NGC 2959, which I just completed last night, or at least completed capturing all of the data. And as you can see, these are roughly 24 meg in size, each one of these, and there's 257 of them. So that takes up a fair amount of space. If we come back over here, it's in the approved directory. And if I go to properties, it's going to take a minute here, but you can just see, almost 6 gigs worth of data. So that's a fair amount of space that's needed. Now, if we come down here, and let me look at my batch processing directories. Once I take those and I calibrate them, all of a sudden they become 94 meg in size. Okay, and then as we move along and we get down here to weighted, all of a sudden they're 284 meg in size. That's a huge amount of data, and we still have 257 images. That is just astronomical, pun intended actually. So let's look at the properties of that, and where we were 6-7 gigs, now we're up to 70 gigs worth of space required. And at least for this target, I'm going to have, I just did my subframe selector, so that was the weighted. Then I'm going to be going into star alignment, which is going to go into my registered. So not only am I going to have 257 images roughly the same size, there's going to be the drizzle data file, there's going to be the local normalization data file, and so it's going to need 70 gigs worth of more space. So as you can see, as we go through calibration, color calibration, debearing, weighting, registering, each one of these directories is just going to increase in size and the need for space on our drives. So that's the first thing we got to take into consideration. We're going to need a lot of space to work off of. Now, if we go back over here, you'll see, let me back up here real quick, and 8 hours completed. So, in my pre-processing, you can see I've only got two targets in there right now, right? Well, I have completed all of these targets up to the point where I've drizzled, or in one case I didn't drizzle the data. So all of these were done, and I was trying to use my NAS, but certain things were taking just way too long. And you know, it just was horrible as far as the times were concerned. So what I was doing was I would start a process, let it run while I was at work, come home, start the next process, let it run while I was sleeping, and it took forever to get most of these done. And you know, I should have just did what I'm going to describe to you here now, which is what I was doing when I didn't have so many targets compiled. So what do we need to know, and as far as our disks are concerned? Well, as you can see here, I have 3 hard drives attached to this PC. My C drive is an SSD drive, so that by default is going to be my fastest drive. That is why I put that in here. Gives me much faster boot up times, read writes. You know, when I'm processing videos and stuff, it rocks it. And then, you know, my data drive is a 1 terabyte regular 7200 RPM 2.5 inch laptop drive. Runs really well, decent amount of storage, and that's where, when SGP is running, that's where it's dumping the files, and for me to blink and then eventually move up over to the NAS. What we have here is the G drive, which is again a 1 terabyte 7200 RPM 2.5 inch drive in an external enclosure. So that one's hooked up via USB. It is USB 3 capable, at least the enclosure is. So you know, the bottleneck's not going to be on the USB bus. And what's not displayed here, because it's not a hard drive, is my H drive, which I'm putting in there to demonstrate in case you want to try to use those as well, is a SD card. The SDH, I can't remember what its designator is now, but anyways, it's one I use for my photography camera, not my astrophotography camera, but my regular camera. And you know, that's got the extreme speeds capable. You know, it's a micro SD card, and it just, you know, I needed it for my major, or my main camera, because of buffering issues. The non-extreme cards, you know, when trying to do bursts, it just wasn't capable of keeping up on the buffer. This card did to a better degree. Anyways, now I would love to use the 500 gig SSD drive, but as you saw, the file sizes just exponentially keep getting larger and larger and larger as we process the data, and you know, it ends up needing, you know, roughly 300 gigs of data unless I clear out previous directories. So if I go back over here to this guy, you know, once I've, you know, calibrated my lights and they go into this direct, you know, the calibrated directory, then I move on to cosmetic correction, right? Well, so once those are saved here, I can go back in and clear out the calibrated directory to free up the space. Well, you know, and then when I move to debared, I can clear out the CC directory, so on and so forth, and until I get to weighted. Now, once you have weighted, if you're going to be doing drizzle, you're going to need to leave those files there. Sometimes I've had issues where where I cleared out the weighted directory and it was trying to update the drizzle data that was in that directory, but it wasn't supposed to be in that directory. It was in the registered directory. So for that reason, I like to leave all the files in place, finish one target, at least getting up to where I have a single working image, one drizzled, one non-drizzled, and once I'm to that point, and I'll start my post-processing, which you saw that directory. I've got a bunch to do. I will then clear out these and start working on the next pre-processing set of data. Again, start a process if it's going to take a while. Let it run overnight while I'm sleeping or while I'm at work, type of deal. Now, because of the space needed, I do not use my C drive. It's only half a terabyte. There's plenty of other data on there, and I just don't have the space to be able to maintain keeping all of the files going on. So for that reason, I use my E drive, the 1 terabyte internal drive. I could use my USB drive. It's equally as fast, but the fact that it's USB, if anything happens on the USB bus, you have one other thing in line that can be a point of failure. So I prefer to let's just use the internal drive that's on the SATA bus, and we'll be good to go. Now, the other reason that I don't use the SSD is because SSDs have an expected shelf life, and it's in terabytes written is the term. So this particular SanDisk drive, according to the manufacturer, should have a life of at least 80 terabytes worth of data written to the drive. So if we come over here and we look at total host writes, you'll see that it is at 8.6 terabytes right now, and it's roughly a year old. So if I've done 8 terabytes or 8.5 terabytes in 1 year, then in theory I should get about 8 more years out of this drive. So that would be good. But if I'm constantly writing 300 gigs worth of data every couple of days, that shelf life's gonna just die. So for that reason, I do not use the SSD drive for my Astro processing. But how do we determine which drive is going to be our fastest drive? So let me minimize this. Most of our drive intensive processes are going to be in the pre-processing. So when we're creating our calibration frames, we're calibrating our lights, cosmetic correction, debayering, so frame selector, star alignment, local normalization, image integration, and drizzle integration. All of those are the steps that I do in my pre-processing. So they are the ones that are constantly reading and writing 480 files if it's 1 minute subs, 240 plus files if it's 2 minute subs, and so on and so forth. So when you're, especially with the open clusters, when I have 480 files, that's a lot of files to read and write. So we want to use the fastest drive available, but the one that's going to give us the amount of space. To get the space, and for the SSD to get the how much the TBW rating, or not rating, but how much has been written to the drive, I use this little app called or a program called Crystal Disk Info. It's free to download. Just gotta go out, search it, install it. And that's pretty much the only thing I use it for, is to just keep an eye on where I'm at here. Once I get to probably 50 or 60 terabytes written, I'll probably think about cloning the disk onto a new one and driving forward. So I can close that out and I won't need it anymore. Now, to test the read-write of our disks, I like to use this ATTO disk benchmark. Now, I will say, when you search for it, it is free. However, when you do search for it, ATTO obviously is going to be your first result, your top result. If you want to download directly from them, they're going to ask you to fill in a form, and you're going to start getting some spam messages. Somewhere in there was the Major Geeks website, which also hosts the file, and you can download it from them and not get any spam because you don't have to fill out a form. So I would recommend going with one of the alternate links like Major Geeks, so that you can get that without having to fill in a form and getting promotional spam from ATTO. But do you? And if you're okay with it, by all means, go ahead. So most of the time I just leave this default. So we're going to get into the actual testing of the drives. And so first I'm going to test my C drive, and the input output sizes and the file size. We can drop this down, but I'm just going to leave it default for this first one here. And all we got to do, just hit start and let it run. Alright, that one has completed. As you can see, 435 meg write, 430 meg read, pretty consistent. So let me screenshot this. We'll just put that off to the side. So the next one we're going to do is the E drive here. And again, just leave it and we'll let it run and see what we get. Again, the C drive was my SSD. E drive is going to be a standard platter-based hard drive. So let's see what we get. Alright, so as you can see here, roughly 1/4 the speed. So those SSD drives are definitely a lot quicker. So we're gonna just go ahead and since we know that one's our fast one, but we're not gonna be using that one, I'm just gonna go ahead, do a new, and let's compare this drive with the USB drive, which was G. Let's get that started. as you can see, it's about the same. It's a little bit faster at the larger files, but at the smaller files, it's just a hair slower. But again, I kind of don't want to use it because it is USB based. So I'll keep using the E drive as my my processing drive. But out of curiosity, let's take a look at the micro SD card. Let's see how fast that thing is. All right, that's completed. So as you can see, about a quarter the speed of the hard drive. Should be faster than that. So I'm gonna have to do a little research on why that's running so slow. But anyways, I don't use it anyways for this, but you know, it is what it is. But in a pinch, if you needed to store some images on there, you know, you could. But for processing, the read write's just way too slow. So we're going to move on to my NAS, and you know, that's I think I increased that. I think it's now 11 terabytes worth of total space to be used. So let's see how quickly that goes. Now, mind you, I am doing this over Wi-Fi, so we are, you know, we're going to be limited by the Wi-Fi speed a little bit. So actually, let me pull up that monitor. So we will look at that. Let's go ahead and start. And as you can see, it's running pretty good. Now the router I have is capable of gigabit speed over the Wi-Fi. So we're pretty much going to be limited by the speed of the NAS itself, the ability to read write off of its disks and send the data to from itself. So wow, that did not come out very good, did it? Well, that's interesting. That crashed. Let's go back. Let's restart. I'm going to bump this down to the 64. Oh no, that's 256. So everything seems to level out. Let's go down to 16 meg. Yeah, let's go ahead and start. going to restart this. I did not realize, but I had another PC that was doing a backup, so it was using some of the resources on the network. So let me restart that. Alright, well, as you can see, we're roughly half on the write, but pretty close on the read to when I'm using the NAS. So, what does that tell us? Well, if we were going for pure speed, we would use the SSD, but due to the large amount of data that we're reading and writing, not the best idea, or we would be swapping out those SSDs because we would be hitting the TBW limits too soon. So we go with the traditional platter hard drive, either on the NAS or on the local drive. Get a little bit better performance out of the USB external drive, but I kind of like to just use that for temporary storage as opposed to important information. That's just my personal preference. And the NAS is great for long-term storage. It has the RAID capability, so it's, data integrity is there. If the hard drive fails, I'm not going to lose anything, but it is slower to read, or it is slower to write rather, than it is to read. So for heavy processing where we're going to be doing read and writes, especially with 400 files, not the best option. So let me close this out. Get rid of this guy. So what does that mean for my process? Well, as a general rule, I already have all my calibration stuff done. Those are flat files up there on the NAS. I leave them on the NAS. No need to put them local, since it's just a single file that it's going to be referencing when it comes to bias, dark, whole, and or flat. What I'll do is on the lights, I will leave them up on my NAS. Okay, I'll just go up here, go into my targets, and we'll go into the pre-processing. And so, for example, I'm working on this guy here, so I just drill all the way down. I leave them on my NAS, open them up, all my calibration frames, they're also up there. Just take a look up here, calibration, master files, and there's my current. So I'll just grab those, and or these, I'm still working on updating some of these, but I know this is the bias. I know this particular bias is good, so I'll leave him there, and so on and so forth. But my output directory, I will use my data drive, and I will store it here. Okay, so the read from the NAS was comparable to the local drive, but the write was only half. So I'm going to read it from the NAS. I'm going to write it to the local drive, and then from then on until I get done with my integrations, everything's going to be done off the local drive. You know, the lights, cosmetic correction, debearing, and subframe selector, those for the most part are more read-write intensive than CPU intensive. It's when we get to the star alignment and local normalization and then the integrations, so these last 4 processes, those are heavy CPU dependent. So when I got done with this guy, I could, in theory, have everything on the NAS, because the bottleneck's not going to be on the read-write now. It's going to shift over to the CPUs, you know, the CPU and the threads and the cores, and how much data it can process, and you know, across the given time frame. And when those last 4 processes are running, the CPU is pegged. There's not a lot of rewrites going on, and it, you know, so it just makes sense that I could put it up there, but I leave it local, just because. And then once I get to the image integration and the 4 images, slope, rejection high, rejection low, and integration pop up here, I save that to the NAS. And then I work off the NAS as far as the actual image processing, simply because everything's done in memory at that point. So you're just loading the file from the NAS, and it doesn't take that long to read or write as it does when you're trying to deal with, when you're using the one file as opposed to 240 or 480 files for the other processes. So that, in a nutshell, well, maybe not such a nutshell, but maybe a basket of nuts of how you can go through, test your storage devices, find which ones have the fastest speeds, both read and write, and then determine what's going to work best for you. If I was going pure speed from the hard drive, yeah, I would be using the SSD drive. It was 4 times faster, and that wouldn't be my bottleneck on the early processes. But that's not the only concern. I don't want to burn out that hard drive that SSD drive too quickly. So I use one of the platter drives. Could I use the USB? Yes, but I've had USB drives fail in the past. So, I'm not too keen on using that for anything more than temporary storage. And I don't want to burn it out. So I use the internal hard drive to do all of my data processing. And then from there, I move up to the NAS, which is for my long-term storage and working post-processing files. So I hope this helps you out. If you have the ability to put multiple drives in there, especially if you have the opportunity to put in an SSD drive, much faster. If you can make that as your main boot drive, things will load quicker, your PC will boot faster. I highly recommend you do that if you can. Otherwise, try to work off of a platter drive and just figure out which works for you, for your situation. But for me, it's a little convoluted. In essence, I could copy all of the original files onto my USB drive and completely work off the USB drive until I get to the integration steps, and I'm saving that single file, and then push that up to the NAS and wipe the USB drive. Would it work? Yes, but just because I'm a little leery of using the USB drive, I don't. So, I live with the way my process works as far as which drive is used when, and it's just part of my mindset now, part of my workflow, and I'm used to it. So figure out what works best for you, do what works best for you, and as always, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. Please hit that like button if you found this useful. Subscribe to the channel if you so choose. If you do, please hit that bell so that you can get notified when I post something new. And as always, clear skies. Have a good one.